The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, thank you for joining today's webinar. Today's Tech Break is sponsored by Index Engines, and today we're talking about how to recoup offsite tape storage expenses. My name is Jim McGann. I'm VP of Marketing here at Index Engines, and I will be taking you through today's presentation. The challenge with the legacy backup environment is complex. It requires lots of resources really to maintain the data center environment and the infrastructure. And we talk to a lot of customers that do have these legacy environments. It's non-production backup environments where it could have been a backup strategy that was implemented long ago or something that was inherited through a merger or through an acquisition. So the resources required to maintain that infrastructure is complex and can be expensive. Obtaining the backup software, keeping it current, maintaining off-site storage expenses is complex, and also there's expense around and risk around the hidden liability of that content. And we also frequently talk to customers that worry about the degradation of those tapes. So as they age, even if they're in properly stored off-site, salt mines, they still can degrade. So the challenge is maintaining a infrastructure and environment, and the expense to support legacy backup tapes can be complex and can be very expensive. Access to legacy content is difficult. The backup software is proprietary, whether you use Symantec products or IBM products or EMC products, it's all proprietary. And you really have required the original environment to access specific files and email data off of those tapes. The catalog also can only be managed by the media server. So we have clients that have significantly large catalogs in the terabytes, and in order for them to be useful, they need to be managed by the media server that created them. As a result, clients are often locked into their backup vendor. Risk of changing backup strategies is high. Blocking or access to legacy tape content becomes difficult because if you don't have the specific versions that made those backup tapes, it's difficult. You can't get access to the data. And so migration is complex. The issue of migration from brand A to brand B becomes a complicated conversation because you have all that legacy infrastructure in place. So what we're talking about today is our Catalyst product from Index Engines. It really simplifies access and management of legacy backup tape data, and it really unlocks that content. The idea here is the catalog can be ingested into the Catalyst platform in order to simplify the management of those tapes. Currently, we support IBM's TSM and Symantec's NetBackup, with more to come shortly, but those seem to be two very popular backup environments where people are looking to either migrate or provide access to. Not only the ability to unlock the data from the catalog, but a full scan of the tapes provides direct access to the legacy tape content. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is Index Engine's ability to provide direct scanning technology that will allow individual file and email access based on search, keyword content search, or metadata search. So what this does is it really eliminates the requirement to maintain the legacy backup software. It's no longer required. In this case, you can retire legacy backup software vendors. You can maintain and still maintain cost-effective access to the legacy tape data. So we are working with clients every day that are implementing new strategies that allow them to migrate to best-of-breed backup software and also to remediate legacy tapes. So the fact that we provide cost-effective access to the catalog and to the specific tape content allows the expiration or the shutdown of the legacy backup environment, as well as the remediation of legacy tapes from off-site storage. So it's really a double win here to be able to reduce data center costs. So the workflow here is fairly simple. So you basically have your media server, where we have either a TSM or a NetBackup in this case environment. We have the ability to ingest that tape catalog into the Catalyst platform. It is a 2U server that would sit inside your firewall in your data center. Connected to the Catalyst product is either a SAS or fiber-connected library. That's so if you need to scan the tapes or scan individual content, restore individual content, you'll need a tape reader, either a drive or a library. So the fact that this environment's set up and you've ingested the catalog, you can now search the catalog, which will show you some screens of how that works, for specific tapes containing relevant files and emails. So if you're looking for email in the 2009 timeframe, you can find the relevant tape with that content. When you find those relevant tape or tapes, you can load those tapes into the drive, which is connected to Catalyst, which is this here. You perform a deep scan of the tape. So our unique indexing technology allows you to index the tape content in backup format images, whether it be, in this case, TSM or net backup. We also support Commvault and Networker and Backup Exec and all sorts of other formats. You can perform a deep scan of the tapes, which will fully index the files and email data. It's not like a file listing that you see on some catalogs. It's a full text index of emails, attachments, and files, and full content that exists on there. It goes inside the Exchange database and PSTs and in Notes databases as well. You can search for a specific document, search for a specific user mailbox, search for a specific user email, and then extract the native documents to disk. So this works whether you're trying to satisfy a legal discovery request. So if legal comes to you and say you need to find specific file or email, this works fine, and it's a common use case. It also works well if you're trying to remediate legacy tapes. So if you can develop a policy of what content needs to be restored from tape or retrieved from tape, specific user mailboxes, date ranges, keywords, and so on, you can execute that policy against all the tapes that are in offsite storage and remediate that content. So the unique feature with the Index Engines platform, the Catalyst platform, is it's very different from traditional tape restoration processes. And that's typically done by either third-party vendors or within your data center using the original backup software. You need to create the original environment. So as tapes are current, so if you created tapes last week, the original environment's up and running. If the tapes are 3, 4, 5 years old, which is common, even 10 years old, the original environment doesn't exist any longer. So you need to create the original environment. Without any knowledge of what exists on these tapes, you'll need to restore 100% of the tape content, index what's restored, dedupe the results. As you know, on tape, there's significant volumes of redundant and duplicative data. You need to clean that up, search for what you need, and then extract that content. So what we see on legacy backup tapes is typically customers need to maintain far less than 5% of what exists on those tapes. So having to restore all of it just to get that 5% is really incredibly time-consuming and a wasted expense. What we're talking about today is an automated approach. So the Catalyst platform performs direct indexing of the tape content. So directly scan it without having the original backup software. It'll automatically dedupe in the process of searching. You can say just eliminate duplicate results, and you can search for unique and relevant content and then extract that data. In the traditional case, 100% of the data moves from tape. In the Catalyst automated approach or direct indexing, only the relevant data will move from tape. It's a very unique technology that can get inside backup images, whether on tape or disk, index the content, and allow surgical extraction of specific content. So the challenge that we see a lot of customers facing is, the expense of maintaining all that legacy content and the legacy infrastructure to support any kind of future compliance or legal request can be expensive. So one of the key strategies that we endorse is the ability to retire legacy backup software. So if the backup software is no longer in production, it's an older environment that was used in the past, Catalyst can ingest and manage the legacy catalog going forward. So just by a simple connection to the backup media server, the catalog can be ingested into the Catalyst platform and then managed going forward. The legacy backup software can then be retired. This is where you're going to save significant maintenance costs. So a lot of the, some of the vendors out there charge really astronomical maintenance costs to maintain it year after year. Also to upgrade it and keep it current. Also, you can eliminate any of the internal knowledge you need or the specific capabilities you need to run those applications. So the manpower that you would need to run those. And future access to legacy tapes is managed directly by Catalyst. So if you do need to go access it, you can. You can do it internally just by searching the catalog, finding the relevant tape, doing a deep scan of that tape, and then extracting individual content as required. The other phase I mentioned earlier is legacy tape remediation. So if you wanted to go further and save additional expense, you can look at all those legacy tapes that are sitting in offsite storage vaults like Iron Mountain, Recall, and so on. And because Catalyst provides a very cost-effective access to tape content using the direct tape indexing and search capability, you can enable legacy tape remediation, and that's getting rid of those legacy tapes, which can be done over time. So if you've got 10,000, 20,000 tapes, which is fairly common, it could take some time. But if you look at the catalog information and just really focus on understanding and profiling that content, you can make the process fairly reasonable and fairly insignificant. So in order to do that, you would apply these collection policies to the legacy tapes. Collection policy is basically through your business users, the compliance and legal groups, saying what kind of data do you need from tape? Obviously not the redundant data, probably not databases, probably not stuff that's 10 years old. So what kind of stuff do you need from tape? And you can extract that content, which is, again, typically what we see is typically less than 1% of all the stuff that's on tape is the stuff that really needs to be retained for long-term archiving. The process is pretty simple. Use catalog culling, which I'll talk about. We'll eliminate the bulk tapes, things like blank tapes. There's a lot of blank tapes sitting in offsite storage. Potentially incremental backups, if you're able to do so. If you've got weekly fulls, for example, you really don't need the incrementals. They're highly redundant. Backups of databases, say Oracle and SAP backups. Non-user data, we see a lot of tapes that would have server logs, for example. And then tapes that are outside the retention period, old tapes that are beyond 7, 8, 10 years, and so on, that may not be required whatsoever by your legal teams. And then, catalog culling can eliminate a significant volume of tape. And then once you do that, the detailed culling, because remember the Catalyst product has a full text and metadata index of everything that's on the tape, you can do some detailed culling, which allows you to specify specific mailboxes, owners, keywords, everything, date ranges, and so on. So to make the job easy, we really use the data profiling or backup tape profiling in order to accomplish the task. So if you kind of look at this slide here, and you consider an environment where you've got, say, 10,000 tapes, they're legacy backup tapes. Let's assume they're LTO3 or a combination, but LTO3 is fairly common. The capacity in that case, if you've got 10,000 LTO3 tapes and you assume that they're compressed and about 90% utilized, you're facing about 7 petabytes of data. So 7 petabytes of data on backup tapes, and backup tapes are not known to be the fastest speed in terms of transferring data. They're in fact fairly slow. In this case, LTO3s are running about 80 megabytes per second. You can see that it's, the moving data off of those tapes could be incredibly, incredibly time consuming. For example, if you look at something like redundant data, so redundant data would be, incremental backups and just duplicative data that's on those tapes. We see that about 90% of these tapes that we typically see are redundant data. So if you say 90% of the data on there is redundant, that's about 6.3 petabytes in this case, down from the 7 petabytes. So 90% redundant is a lot of data. If you wanted to move them off those tapes at those speeds, you're talking at 896 days. That's pretty much forever in a data center. That's going to take a significant volume of time. And moving redundant data is probably not the best use of anyone's time or the best expense out there. So you can use profiling to figure out that stuff. You can also use profiling to figure out the age data, the stuff that doesn't have any long-term retention requirements. Potentially structured databases. Again, it depends on your business here. But for legal and compliance teams, if you talk about structured databases, Oracle, SAP, so on, most of them say we don't really need to retain that content. There's no legal hold requirement against structured databases. Some organizations can also filter out and profile out things like non-email data, so user files, office documents, PDFs, things like that, which represent some key percentage, depending on your organization, of data. And then email, it may come down to just email content, which in this case could be only a small percent of what exists on those unique tapes. So your percentages will vary, but typically more than 90% of it is duplicative and redundant content, which represents, in this case, of the 7 petabytes that's on tape, it's 6.3 of those petabytes. So being able to use intelligent processing and profiling to filter out that content really streamlines the process of remediation. And then, so the workflow is pretty simple. You can go and basically inventory the tapes and do a visual inspection of them. You'll find, a small percentage of them, here we're saying 2% of them, could be damaged and require no further processing. You can do, again, catalog culling, as I mentioned, which could eliminate, high-level profile of tapes and eliminate, unreadable tapes and things like that, which could be a significant volume. The catalog culling process, as I mentioned, could get rid of significant numbers of tapes. In this case, I'm down to, I've eliminated up to 60% at this point, and it reduces large volumes of the tapes based on those policies, say, age range and incrementals versus full and things like that. Then when you do a full scan of the tape, and dedupe and denist it, you can get down to only 20% of the remaining tapes. Do custodian collection. Usually the legal departments will really say these are the specific users whose mailboxes that I need for the past, say, 7 years, and it could represent up to 10% of your organization. So, if you've got, 10,000 employees, you could look for 10% of those mailboxes to be held in an archive. And basically, you extract that data the relevant data into an archive, and then recycle the remaining tapes that have been processed. And we do have clients that are doing this. I mean, we have some of the top world global financial services firms are in the process of doing this. Those organizations that really know about risk and liability of this legacy content. So, it's not just really only your offsite storage expense, but if you look at the exposure that your organization and your company faces in storing all that copies and all that redundant data, including your executive team's emails and your working documents of contracts and proposals and so on. So the tape remediation process is a standalone process. It's not integrated into your online networks. You can really use low-tech resources. It's a very automated process. The tape library automates as much as possible. It could easily scale up using multiple Catalyst engines. We have environments that are using dozens and dozens of engines to speed up the processing. And your really expense is your manpower, which is really more of a junior, non-dedicated resource. The tape library and the index engines processing capability can get through and churn through those tapes. Some of the examples of the projects that we have in place are significant. The first one I mentioned is a couple 100,000 tapes that are Lotus Notes, actually, and loose files. It's about 18 petabytes of data. There's 33 DLT, SDLT, and LTO libraries. There's 35 index engines in there. The processing now is getting to be about 5,000 tapes per month. So it's a very fast and efficient factory that's been built to process those tapes. And what they're archiving from those 18 petabytes of data is just 212 terabytes of user mailboxes. Some other projects are, around that 1 petabyte. This is disk-to-disk backup images, not really tape. Another one is 1,900 Exchange and loose file tapes, about 95 terabytes of data, using 3 drives and 3 index engines. They're processing about 500 tapes a week, really putting on, in the archive, 300 gigabytes of data. And in that process, it took about 4 weeks to execute. So you can see some ideas of time frames and resources required in order to process legacy tapes. We do have an ROI analysis, so if you're interested in learning more, we can take you through this calculator, which will, in your environment, depending on the tapes, whether they're LTO 4 or 5 tapes versus DLT or 8 millimeter tapes, makes a big difference in terms of processing speed. So this calculator will look at the different environment, what you have, the number of tapes, and kind of really give you an estimate of resources and costs required to resolve these or remediate these tapes for the long term. So that's it. We wanted to keep it short today. It's Friday afternoon. I wanted to keep it less than half an hour, which we've done. If you do have questions, my email address is on the screen there. Feel free to reach out and ask any questions. If you want to see a demo of the technology, I'm happy to arrange that for you. We also have a white paper that talks about the process. I can send you a copy of the slides and as well as the white paper. We've recorded today's session, so if you want to share it with others, we can send you a link to the YouTube recording as well. So thank you all for your time today. Appreciate it. And if you do have questions, reach out, and we look forward to speaking with you in the near future.